Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Yevamot. We are up to Perek Daled, Mishnah Yud Gimel. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'elu Nishmad Neria ben Svetlana, Ranbai V'Eliyahu ben Burcha Yisrael Van Chana bat Miriam Menuchatam Began Eden, Amen. And Le'avdi ben Chaim L'Chaim V'Refuah Shelemav Daniel Shalom ben Rosa Betor Shah Chulei Yisrael. The dispute between Rabbi Akiva and the sages in the previous Mishnah was based on the definition of a mamzer. Our Mishnah now cites a three-way dispute as to the definition of a mamzer. The Mishnah begins, Ezeu mamzer. Who is a mamzer? A mamzer is the child of parents who are forbidden to each other. However, not every forbidden relationship results in the child being a mamzer. Only a child born of the more severe prohibitions is a mamzer. Severe is defined by how strong a punishment the person receives for violating the prohibition deliberately. The Mishnah's question is, how severe a punishment makes the child of that relationship a mamzer? Kol she'er basar shu belo yavo divrei Rabbi Akiva. It is the child of a forbidden relationship with any relative about whom the Torah says he shall not cohabit with her, even if the penalty for doing so is only malkut. These are the words of Rabbi Akiva. These are known as chayve lavin, negative commandments. This excludes prohibitions about which the Torah does not say explicitly not to do them. Rather, it hints at their prohibition by telling a person what to do. These are known as chayve aseh, positive commandments. Rabbi Akiva's definition also excludes forbidden relationships that are not based on being relatives. Now, the previous Mishnah taught that according to Rabbi Akiva, if someone remarries his divorcee, the child of this union is a mamzer. Some say that this is because a divorced wife is considered a relative. Others say that indeed the two Mishnahs disagree whether according to Rabbi Akiva the child of this union is a mamzer. A second view, Shimon HaTimni Omer, Shimon HaTimni says, Kol shechayvin alav karet b'dei shamayim. A mamzer is the child of any forbidden relationship for which one is punished with karet at the hands of heaven. Karet is a heavenly punishment in which a person dies before his time, usually before the age of 60, as it says in Mot Katan, page 28a. In some instances, it also results in the loss of a person's share in the world to come. In addition, almost all karet prohibitions are also subject to malkut. An exception to this rule is a nidah, a woman who menstruated. Although the penalty for cohabiting with her is karet, the child of this union is not a mamzer. V'alacha kidvarav, and the Mishnah says that the law follows his view. A third view, Rabbi Yoshua says, Kol shechayvim alav mitat bedin. A mamzer is the child of any forbidden relationship for which one is punished by death at the hands of the court by execution. However, the child of relationships punishable only by karet and not execution is not a mamzer, according to Rabbi Yoshua, and the Gemara cites the scriptural sources for each of those opinions. Atana cites support for the opinion of Rabbi Yoshua. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Azai. Rabbi Shimon ben Azai said, Matzati Megillat Yuchasin b'Yerushalayim. I once found a scroll of lineage which listed the lineage of various families in Jerusalem. V'chatuv ba, and in it was written, Ish ploni mamzer me'eshet ish. So and so is a mamzer from a relationship between a man and a married woman, someone else's wife. Likayem divrei Rabbi Yoshua. This upholds the words of Rabbi Yoshua, since the punishment of cohabiting with someone else's wife is death by the court. The assumption is that the scroll spelled out the reason for his being a mamzer, adultery, to make clear that the halacha follows Rabbi Yeshua's view. Nevertheless, the Rav and the commentaries explain the halacha follows the view of Shimon HaTimni, as the Mishnah stated above, that a mamzer is the child of any forbidden relationship for which one is punished with karet at the hands of heaven, except for a nidah. The Mishnah returns to the subject of marrying the relatives of certain women. It lists situations where a man had some relationship with the woman but is nevertheless allowed to marry her sister. Ishto shemeta, if a man's wife died, mutar ba'achota, he is permitted to marry her sister. The Torah in Sefer Vayikra, chapter 18, verse 18, states explicitly that a man is forbidden to marry the sister of his wife or former wife only while she is still alive. All the laws in this part of the Mishnah flow from this principle. Gershah v'meta, if he divorced his wife and she later died, mutar ba'achota, he is permitted to marry her sister. Even though she was no longer married to him when she died, her death permits him to marry her sister. Nised la'achel v'meta, if his divorced wife married someone else, thereby becoming forbidden to him forever, and died, mutar ba'achotah, he is permitted to marry her sister. Even tosh shemeta, if a man's Yevamot died, mutar ba'achotah, he is permitted to marry her sister. Chalatz lah v'meta, if he performed chalitza with her and she died, mutar ba'achotah, he is permitted to marry her sister. A chalutza's sister is not treated more strictly than a wife's sister, therefore, wherever a wife's sister is permitted, so too is the chalutza's sister. We continue now with Perek Hey Mishnah Aleph. Mishnah 1 focuses on cases where Yavam performs one of the 4 acts that are discussed throughout the Masechet. Chalitza, giving a get, Chalitza, 1 act, giving a get, a 2nd act, cohabitation, a 3rd act, and Ma'amar, a 4th act, more than once. Now, if he does the same act twice with the same Yevamah, it is obviously meaningless since the 2nd act adds nothing to the first. The Mishnah refers to a case where he does the same act with 2 different widows, co-wives of his brother. It addresses whether the 2nd act has any practical effect. And the same issue arises with 2 Yavams and 1 widow, where each Yavam performed that act with her. Now, for the sake of simplicity, we're going to follow the Art School Status translation, its notes, which limits the explanation to the case of 1 Yavam with 2 widows. Rabban Gamliel says, En get achar get, there is no significance to a get after a get, and if a Yavam gave a get to one of his brother's widows and then gave a get to her co-wife, the 2nd get has no effect and he is permitted to marry her relatives. This is because the first get already removed as much of the Ibum bond between the Yavam and the widow as a get can remove, so a 2nd get does nothing. This is how the Rav explains the Mishnah from the Gemara in page 51a in Masechet Yevamot. Therefore, for example, if a Yavam gave a get to one widow, Rachel, and then to the other widow, Leah, he is allowed to marry Leah's relatives as though he had never given her a get. Now this is true obviously once Leah is released from her biblical Yibum bind by the Chalitza of her co-wife Rachel. Before she is released, he is forbidden to her relatives as well as the relatives of his Zikukah, like we spoke about in chapter 3, Mishnah 1. Velo ma'amar achar ma'amar, nor is there any significance to a ma'amar after a ma'amar, meaning if a Yavam made ma'amar with 1 widow and then did so with the 2nd widow, the 2nd act of a ma'amar is meaningless and he is permitted to marry her relatives because the first ma'amar accomplished what ma'amar can accomplish in a Yibum relationship. Therefore, the 2nd ma'amar created no marriage bond with the 2nd widow, and for this reason, she does not need a get from the Yavam, and he is allowed to marry her relatives. Velo bi'ila achar bi'ila, nor is there significance to a cohabitation after a cohabitation, since the first cohabitation fulfilled the mitzvah of Yibum and completely erased the Yibum bond. Since there is no longer Yibum bond, the 2nd cohabitation with the other widow is simply a forbidden act performed with the woman with whom he has no connection, which does not prohibit the man to marry the woman's relatives. Velo chalitza achar chalitza, nor is there any significance to a chalitza after a chalitza, since the first one completely removed the Yibum bond. The 2nd chalitza is therefore meaningless, and the Yavam is allowed to marry the relatives of the 2nd woman. Now the sages disagree with the first 2 rulings of Rabban Gamliel, but agree with the last 2. V'chachamim omrim, but the sages say, yesh get achar get, there is significance to a get after a get, since even after the first get there is still a Yibum bond. Therefore the 2nd get forbids him to marry the relatives of the 2nd widow. Now, the commentaries explain a get does not remove the biblical Yibum bond, and the Yevamot still needs chalitza. The sages therefore view the first get as removing only part of the Yibum bond. The 2nd get can therefore take effect on part of the bond that remains. V'yesh ma'amar achar ma'amar, and there is significance to a ma'amar after a ma'amar. The first ma'amar did not completely erase the Yibum bond between the Yavam and the widows, since even after the ma'amar she still needs Yibum. Therefore, there is still room for the 2nd ma'amar to take effect on the 2nd widow. Avalo achar bi'ila v'lo achar chalitza klum. But after cohabitation, after chalitza, there is nothing, meaning no Yibum related act can take effect because the Yibum or chalitza removed the Yibum bond completely. For this reason, not only does a 2nd cohabitation or a 2nd chalitza not take effect on the 2nd widow, like Rabban Gamliel said, but no further acts of cohabitation, chalitza, get, or ma'amar will take effect either. Like we mentioned, the Mishnah's ruling is explained regarding 1 Yavam performing separate acts with 2 widows. Similar rulings would apply to 2 Yavams, each performing an act with the same widow. According to Rabban Gamliel, the 2nd Yavam would not become forbidden to her relatives, while according to the sages in the cases of Get and Ma'amar, he would become forbidden to them. And the Rav does tell us that Halacha follows the opinion of the Chachamim. That is the Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.